the Mafia boss's son stopped breathing in my diner. I used a forbidden technique to bring him back. The breathless silence. The silence started at exactly 11:14 p.m., and by 11:16, every person in the diner knew something was catastrophically wrong. Julian Vane sat in the corner booth, his jaw clenched, his tailored black suit immaculate, his reputation as the city's most feared man hanging by a thread. In his arms, 4-month-old Leo had gone completely still. The baby's lips were turning blue, his tiny body limp, the absence of crying, more deafening than any scream could ever be. Outside, the highway hummed with late-night traffic, unaware that inside these walls, a powerful man was losing the only battle that mattered. Julian's men stood frozen around the booth. They had seen him handle threats, betrayals, and violence without flinching. But this was different. One of them fumbled for his phone. "Boss, I'm calling 911. Julian's voice came out strangled. "They're 20 minutes out." Another guard dropped beside the booth, his hands shaking. "Should I try CPR? I took a course." Julian had already tried it. His tattooed fingers, so precise with a trigger, had fumbled against his son's tiny ribcage. Same result, nothing. The baby's face grew paler with each passing second. His chest refused to rise. And Julian Vane, a man who controlled half the city's underground, could not control whether his own son would take another breath. Marcus, his second in command, leaned forward, his voice tight. "Boss, we need to move him. The hospital." Julian's dark eyes flashed with something close to madness. "I've had 3 specialists examine him this month. They all said if the airway closed again, there wouldn't be time." His voice was steady, but the strain showed in the way he held Leo closer, the way his fingers trembled just slightly against the baby's back, the way his rings clinked against the vinyl booth. Since the death of his wife Sophia during a home invasion 6 months ago, an attack meant for him, Julian had refused to be separated from his son. The baby came to meetings, to negotiations, to territory deals. It was not normal. His men knew it. The rival families whispered about it. But no one dared question a grieving man with that much power and that much ink representing that much blood. The diner had been nearly empty when they arrived an hour ago. Rosie's 24-hour, a forgettable roadside spot off Route 9, belonged to Julian through a complicated web of shell companies that kept his name off the property records. Tonight was supposed to be a simple exchange, territory maps, cash transfers, the usual business. But Leo's sudden collapse had derailed everything. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence. The briefcase of cash sat unopened on the table. Every man in the booth felt the tension coiling tighter with each passing second, watching their boss hold a child who wouldn't breathe. Julian stood abruptly, cradling Leo against his shoulder, pacing the narrow space between booths. He had tried everything in the weeks since the first episode. Different pediatricians, different specialists, different emergency protocols. He had hired a private nurse who'd quit after 3 days because she couldn't handle the pressure of watching a mafia boss's only heir. The doctors had warned him this could happen again, a rare anatomical quirk, a collapsing airway, a blockage that came without warning. They'd given him instructions, devices, numbers to call. But when the moment arrived, none of it mattered. Julian barely slept anymore. His eyes were shadowed, his patience worn to nothing. He was used to solving problems with money or force, with strategic violence or carefully placed bribes. But you could not threaten an infant's body into cooperating. You could not buy your way out of this particular nightmare. The clock on the wall ticked past 11:17. Leo's lips were almost purple now. And for the first time in his adult life, Julian Vane felt completely, utterly powerless. Across the diner, partially hidden behind the counter, Clara Whitlock stood with a coffee pot frozen in her hand. She had been refilling the sugar dispensers when the silence started. Now her brown eyes were locked on the dying child, and her face had gone white, not with fear, but with recognition. She knew exactly what was happening. She'd seen this before. Once. In a surgical theater 3 years ago, during a case that had ended her career and destroyed everything she'd built. A rare laryngotracheal obstruction, the kind most doctors never encountered in their entire practice, the kind that looked like choking but wasn't, the kind that killed in minutes if you followed standard protocol. The coffee pot trembled in her hand. Every survival instinct from the past 3 years screamed at her to stay invisible, to let someone else handle this, to protect the secret that had cost her everything. She'd rebuilt herself as a ghost, a nobody, a waitress in a roadside diner, a woman with no history and no future. But Leo's blue-tinged lips screamed louder than her fear. She set down the pot. Her hands moved automatically toward the first aid kit under the counter, not for bandages, but for the makeshift tools she'd need: a penlight, gloves, the small suction bulb she'd always kept there, just in case, even though she swore she'd never practice medicine again. She didn't ask permission. She didn't announce herself. She walked straight past 3 armed men who could kill her without a second thought, past the murderous desperation in Julian Vane's eyes, past the invisible line that separated the powerful from the powerless. She stopped at the edge of the booth and said 4 words that would change everything. "Let me see him." Julian's head snapped up. His eyes met hers, a waitress, a nobody, a woman in a stained apron with her hair in a messy bun, and for a split second she saw him calculate whether to trust her or end her. "I know what's wrong with him." Clara's voice was steady despite her racing heart, despite the way her hands wanted to shake, despite the 3 years of hiding that were about to evaporate. "And I know how to fix it, but we have less than 2 minutes, so you need to decide right now if you'll let me try." The clock read 11:18 p.m. Leo's chest still wasn't moving. Marcus reached for his weapon instinctively, but Julian raised one hand, a command for stillness. "Who are you?" Julian's voice was raw, desperate, dangerous. "Right now?" Clara met his eyes without flinching. "I'm the only person in this diner who knows why your son is dying. And if you don't move in the next 30 seconds, I'm the last person who could have saved him." For 1 heartbeat, 2, Julian Vane stared at her. A man who trusted no one, who'd survived this long by assuming everyone was a threat, by eliminating problems before they could grow. Then he shifted Leo toward her. Clara's hands moved with a precision that came from years of training she wasn't supposed to have anymore. She tilted the baby's head, angled the penlight, saw exactly what she expected. The telltale shadow, the collapsed passage, the blockage that looked like nothing on the surface but was everything underneath. "Hold him exactly like this," she commanded, positioning Julian's hands. "Don't move, don't breathe, and don't stop me, no matter what it looks like I'm doing." She didn't wait for agreement. Her fingers found the pressure points she'd been forbidden to use, the emergency intervention that medical boards across 3 states had deemed too dangerous, too unorthodox, too liable to cause more harm than good. The technique that had saved a child's life in an operating room and cost her the right to ever practice again. It would look brutal to anyone watching. It would seem violent, reckless, insane. But Clara Whitlock had been called all those things before, and she had been right then too. The maneuver took 7 seconds. 7 seconds of controlled force, of precise manipulation, of a skill that existed in the space between saving and breaking. Julian's men moved behind her. She could feel them, could sense weapons being drawn, but she didn't stop. On the 8th second, Leo's body convulsed. On the 9th, he gasped a wet, desperate, beautiful sound. On the 10th, he screamed. The diner erupted back into noise. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter. The smell of burnt coffee felt almost pleasant. And in the corner booth, Julian Vane stared at Clara Whitlock as if she'd just performed black magic. Leo wailed in his father's arms, his face turning from blue to pink, his chest rising and falling with angry, perfect breaths. Clara stepped back, her hands shaking now that it was over, adrenaline crashing through her system like a freight train. She'd just done the one thing she'd sworn never to do again. She'd just revealed herself to the most dangerous man in the city, and she had absolutely no idea what would happen next. Julian looked down at his crying, breathing son, then up at Clara. His voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper. "What did you just do?" Clara met his eyes. 3 years of hiding, 3 years of running, 3 years of being invisible. All of it gone in 10 seconds. "Something I'm not supposed to know how to do," she said quietly. "Something that's going to make tonight very complicated for both of us." Outside, the neon sign flickered. Open 24 hours. Inside, Clara Whitlock's new life was about to begin. And Julian Vane was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones with guns, they're the ones with forbidden knowledge and steady hands. Before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comment section where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. Chapter 1. The Forbidden Hands. Clara had written her thesis on laryngotracheal collapse in infants. 43 pages, peer-reviewed, nearly published before everything fell apart. She could still recite the symptoms from memory. The specific angle of the neck, the particular shade of cyanosis, the way the chest would freeze mid-breath, as if the body had simply forgotten how to live. She saw all of it in Leo Vane's tiny dying body. The coffee pot hit the counter with a crack. Clara was moving before she gave herself permission, before fear could root her in place, before 3 years of careful invisibility could stop her. Her hands were already reaching for the baby as she crossed the diner floor. "Move or he dies." The words tore out of her throat, not a request but a command that sliced through the suffocating tension. Julian's head snapped toward her, his eyes wild with desperation and fury. For half a second she thought he might strike her. His hand twitched toward the weapon at his hip. But then he saw something in her face, the absolute certainty. The clinical focus, and his arms shifted, giving her access. Clara didn't hesitate. She angled Leo's head back with her left hand, her thumb finding the exact pressure point beneath his jaw. Her right hand moved to his sternum, fingers splayed across his tiny ribcage. What happened next would look like violence to anyone watching. It would seem brutal, reckless, the kind of thing that got doctors dragged before medical boards and stripped of everything they'd worked for. She'd been through that already. The maneuver required 3 sharp, calculated compressions, not on the chest where CPR would dictate, but along the trachea itself, combined with a twisting motion of the head that manually forced the collapsed airway to reset. It was the medical equivalent of percussive maintenance, hitting something broken in exactly the right way to make it work again. The first compression made Julian's men reach for their weapons. The second made Marcus lunge forward. The third, Leo's body convulsed in her hands. Then came the sound, a wet, gasping, desperate inhale that filled the diner like a resurrection. Air rushed into lungs that had forgotten how to demand it. The baby's chest expanded, once, twice, and then he was screaming that furious, indignant wail of an infant who'd been dragged back from somewhere dark and didn't appreciate the journey. Clara's hands were shaking as she stepped back. Her breath came in short bursts. The adrenaline that had carried her across the diner was crashing now, leaving her hollow and exposed. Julian stared at her, not at his crying, breathing son at her. His dark eyes were wide, his tattooed neck tense, his entire body frozen in that strange space between relief and shock. He looked at her the way medieval villagers must have looked at witches, with fear and wonder and the dawning realization that something impossible had just occurred. "What?" His voice cracked. He tried again. "What did you just do to my son?" Clara's throat was dry. She could feel Marcus behind her, could sense the other men closing in, trapping her between the counter and the booth. She'd saved the baby. And now she'd have to explain how a waitress in a roadside diner knew a technique that had been banned in 12 states. "I cleared his airway," she said quietly, meeting Julian's eyes, "with a procedure that no one uses anymore, because it's considered too dangerous. But it worked." "Yes. You knew it would work." It wasn't a question. Clara nodded anyway. Julian's jaw tightened. He looked down at Leo, who was still crying beautiful, angry, alive. Then back at Clara. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The desperation was gone. In its place was something far more dangerous, calculation. "You're not a waitress." Clara said nothing. She didn't need to. "You're not leaving this diner," Julian continued, his tone absolutely final, "until you tell me everything." Outside, a truck rumbled past on the highway. Inside, Clara Whitlock realized she'd just traded 3 years of invisibility for 10 seconds of intervention. And there was no going back. Chapter 2. The Gilded Cage. "Julian Vane didn't say thank you," he said. "You're coming with us." And it wasn't a request. By the time the sun crept over the highway at dawn, Clara was in the back of a black SUV with tinted windows that turned the world outside into shadows. Leo slept in a car seat between her and Julian, his breathing steady and perfect, a small miracle wrapped in a blue blanket. She kept her hand near his chest, monitoring the rise and fall, unable to stop herself from checking. Julian watched her watch his son. He hadn't spoken since they left the diner, but his silence carried weight, the kind that pressed against her ribs and made it hard to breathe. "My apartment," Clara started. "Already handled." Julian's voice was flat, businesslike. Marcus cleared it 2 hours ago. Your belongings are being delivered to the estate. Clara's blood went cold. You can't just... I can. He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes unreadable in the dim morning light. You are the only person who knew what to do when my son stopped breathing. The only person in a city of 8 million who saw what 3 specialists missed. That means you don't leave him. I'm not a doctor anymore. I don't care what you are or aren't on paper. Julian's jaw tightened. You're what he needs. That makes you mine. The SUV turned off the main road, climbing into the hills where the city's skyline became a distant glitter. Clara's phone had died an hour ago, or maybe Julian's men had killed it. She couldn't tell anymore. Everything from the past 8 hours felt surreal, like she'd stepped through a door in that diner and emerged in someone else's nightmare. The Vane estate appeared through the trees like something out of a Gothic novel. All marble and iron, high walls topped with cameras that tracked their approach, guards stationed at intervals like pieces on a chessboard. It wasn't a home. It was a fortress designed to keep the world out and secrets in. Julian carried Leo inside without waiting for her. Clara followed because she didn't know what else to do, her sneakers squeaking against polished floors that probably cost more than her entire year's salary at the diner. The foyer alone could have held her old apartment 3 times over. 3rd floor, east wing, Julian said over his shoulder. The nursery. Your room is connected. My room. Clara stopped walking. I didn't agree to stay. Julian turned, and for the first time since the diner, something almost human flickered across his face. Not quite vulnerability, but close. You saved my son's life using a technique you shouldn't know and aren't supposed to use. That tells me 2 things. You're extremely qualified, and you're hiding from something. He shifted Leo in his arms. I don't care what you're running from. While you're here, no one touches you. But you don't leave this estate, and you don't leave him. That's kidnapping. That's insurance. Julian started up the stairs. Your bank account has been transferred to a secure offshore holding. Consider it a signing bonus. You'll receive more once Leo is past the critical period. Clara's legs felt numb. You accessed my bank account. I accessed everything. Clara Whitlock, formerly Clara Whitlock Chen, formerly Dr. Clara Chen of Johns Hopkins. He glanced back. Or should I say, formerly of Johns Hopkins, before they revoked your medical license 3 years ago for performing an experimental procedure without board approval. The air left Clara's lungs. You needed me to stay invisible, Julian continued, his voice almost gentle. I can do that. But in exchange, you stay visible to me. You monitor my son. You use those forbidden hands of yours to keep him alive. He paused at the top of the stairs. Do we have an understanding? Clara looked at the baby in his arms, at the marble halls stretching in every direction, at the cameras mounted in the corners, watching, recording, trapping. She thought about the diner, her studio apartment with its peeling paint and broken heater. 3 years of hiding that had just been erased in a single night. Yes, she whispered. Julian nodded once. Welcome to the Vane estate, Dr. Chen. Try not to think of it as a cage. But as he led her down the hallway to the nursery, past locked doors and armed guards, Clara knew exactly what it was. Chapter 3, Tattoos and Teething. Clara learned to sleep in 20-minute intervals. The nursery had a monitoring system that would make a hospital jealous: oxygen sensors, heart rate monitors, cameras with night vision, but she trusted her own eyes more. Every 2 hours, she'd wake and check Leo's breathing, her fingers ghosting over his tiny chest, until she felt the steady rhythm beneath. The 3rd night, Julian appeared in the doorway at 2 a.m. Clara looked up from the rocking chair, startled. He'd been absent since depositing her in the nursery 3 days ago, a ghost haunting his own fortress. Now he stood in the shadows, wearing a black t-shirt and sleep pants, his dark hair disheveled, looking more human than she'd seen him. He's fine, Clara said quietly. Vitals are stable. Julian nodded but didn't leave. He moved into the room with the careful silence of someone accustomed to not being heard, stopping at the crib to stare down at his son. In the dim glow of the nightlight, Clara could see the exhaustion carved into his face. You should sleep, she offered. Can't. His voice was rough. Every time I close my eyes, I see him turning blue. Clara understood that particular haunting. She carried her own version, played on repeat for 3 years. The 4th night, Julian came earlier. Leo was crying not the desperate, breathless crisis from the diner, but the frustrated wail of a 4-month-old whose gums hurt and whose world made no sense. Julian stood by the crib, his hands hovering over his son, not quite touching. "Pick him up," Clara said from the doorway. "I don't," Julian's jaw clenched. "I don't know how to make it stop." "You can't make teething stop. You can only help him through it." She crossed to the crib, reaching for the teething ring she'd chilled earlier. "Here, try this." Julian finally lifted Leo, and Clara watched something shift in his posture, a rigidity, a fear he was trying to hide behind control. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing ink that covered every inch of skin. Not decorative tattoos, but a map of violence, tally marks on his forearm, Roman numerals along his wrist, a black rose with wilting petals climbing toward his shoulder, each petal detailed and distinct. Clara had seen prison tattoos before. These weren't random. They were a ledger. "Like this?" Julian held the teething ring near Leo's mouth, but his movements were stiff, awkward. The baby twisted away, crying harder. "You're holding him too tight." Clara stepped closer. "He can feel your tension." "I'm not," Julian's voice dropped. "I'm trying not to hurt him." And suddenly Clara understood. This man who'd broken bones and ended lives, who wore his violence like a second skin, was terrified of his own strength. Afraid that the same hands that had caused so much damage would somehow transfer that destruction to the fragile child in his arms. "You won't hurt him," Clara said softly. She reached out, her fingers wrapping around Julian's wrist. His skin was warm beneath the ink, his pulse rapid against her touch. "But you need to relax. Babies feel everything." She guided his hand, adjusting the angle of the bottle, showing him how to support Leo's head without gripping so hard. Their fingers overlapped her small, scarred hands over his large, tattooed ones. For a moment, the nursery fell silent except for Leo's quieting whimpers. Julian's dark eyes found hers. This close, she could see flecks of gold in the brown, could see the way his pupils dilated slightly. The air between them felt charged, dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with guns or threats. "Like this?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes." Clara didn't pull her hand away. "Exactly like that." Leo latched onto the bottle, his crying dissolving into satisfied gulps. Julian's shoulders slowly dropped, the tension bleeding out of him degree by degree. Clara should have stepped back, should have released his wrist, returned to her chair, maintained the careful distance she'd built between captor and captive. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was, her fingers still resting on his skin, feeling his pulse steady beneath the stories inked into his flesh. In the cold marble fortress, surrounded by cameras and guards and locked doors, something impossibly warm had just sparked to life, and neither of them knew how to extinguish it. Chapter 4. Julian caught her staring at his forearms during Leo's morning feeding. Clara had been tracing the pattern with her eyes, the way the Roman numerals spiraled up from his wrist, the dates etched between the tally marks, the deliberate blank spaces left unmarked among the dense ink. "You're wondering what they mean." His voice held no accusation, just tired resignation. Clara shifted Leo in her arms, adjusting the bottle. "I shouldn't ask. But you want to." She did. She'd spent 5 nights watching those tattoos move in the dim nursery light, cataloging them like medical charts. Each mark told a story, and the physician in her the part that still existed despite the revoked license needed to understand the pattern. Julian rolled up his left sleeve completely. In the morning light streaming through the nursery windows, the ink looked almost beautiful in its brutality. The numbers are contracts. The marks are completions. The roses. He touched the wilting black petals on his shoulder. "Those are people I failed to save." Clara's breath caught. "There are 7. 8. He turned his arm, revealing another petal hidden beneath. "My wife makes 8. And the blank spaces?" Julian's jaw tightened. He traced his finger along a clear patch of skin on his inner forearm, about 2 inches of unmarked flesh among the dense artwork. "Those are for things I haven't lost yet. People I'm still trying to protect." His dark eyes found hers. "My son takes this space. You'd go here." The casualness of the statement struck Clara like a physical blow. She was already marked in his ledger, already categorized among the things he counted as his to protect or lose. "I'm not yours to claim," she said quietly. "You became mine the moment you touched my son." Julian sat in the chair opposite her. "You don't get to save someone like me and walk away unchanged." That's not how this works. I didn't save you. I saved Leo. Same thing. Clara looked down at the baby in her arms, sleeping peacefully now, oblivious to the weight of the conversation happening above him. I used to have spaces like that. Blank places where I thought I'd write better stories. What happened? The question hung between them. Clara had spent 3 years avoiding it, running from it, burying it under grease-stained aprons and late-night diner shifts. But something about Julian's honest brutality, the way he wore his violence like a second skin instead of hiding it, made her want to match his truth with her own. There was a child, she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. 18 months old. Airway obstruction, same as Leo. The board wanted me to wait for imaging, for specialists, for protocols that would have taken 12 minutes we didn't have. She swallowed hard. I performed the procedure anyway. It worked. The child lived. And they punished you for it. They said I was reckless, unorthodox, that I'd violated every standard of care and endangered a patient by using an experimental technique without proper authorization. Clara's hands tightened around the bottle. They stripped my license, blacklisted me from every hospital in 3 states, told me I was a danger to the very people I'd sworn to help. Julian leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. But you were right. Being right doesn't matter if you break the rules. It does to the child who lived. Clara met his eyes, and something shifted between them, a recognition that went deeper than captor, and captive, deeper than the forced proximity of the nursery. They were looking at each other across a chasm that only outcasts understood. You chose to live outside the law, Clara said. I was forced outside it. And yet here we are. Julian's voice softened. Both of us marked by the people we tried to save. Both of us carrying ledgers we didn't ask for. Your ledger is written in violence. Yours is written in sacrifice. He stood, moving closer. Don't pretend your scars are cleaner than mine just because they don't show. Clara looked down at her hands, the hands that had saved lives and ended her career. The hands that had touched Julian's tattooed skin in this very room and felt something impossible spark between them. What happens now? She whispered. Julian reached out, his finger tracing the air above her wrist, not quite touching. Now we both figure out what to write in the blank spaces. Outside the nursery, the fortress remained cold and marble. But inside, 2 people marked by their pasts were beginning to imagine unmarked futures. Chapter 5. Dr. Richard Brennan arrived at the estate on a Tuesday morning in a Mercedes that cost more than Clara's entire medical school debt. Julian had insisted on the routine checkup. Leo was thriving, but paranoia was a hard habit to break for a man who'd lost everything once before. Clara was changing Leo's diaper when she heard the footsteps in the hallway, the low murmur of Julian's voice giving instructions. She didn't think anything of it until the nursery door opened, and she looked up into a face she'd spent 3 years praying she'd never see again. Brennan stopped mid-stride. His leather medical bag slipped in his grip. Dr. Chen. Her old name fell from his lips like an accusation. Or should I say, former Dr. Chen. Clara's blood turned to ice. She finished fastening Leo's onesie with hands that had suddenly forgotten how to be steady, buying herself seconds to think. Brennan had been on the disciplinary board at Johns Hopkins. He'd voted to strip her license. He'd called her a danger to patients while she stood there in her best suit, watching her entire life crumble. I go by Whitlock now, she said quietly. I'm sure you do. Brennan's eyes swept the nursery, taking in the medical equipment, the monitoring systems, Clara's proximity to the infant. Interesting career change. From surgical resident to... What exactly are you doing here? Julian appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the space. She's monitoring my son's recovery. Is there a problem? A problem? Brennan's smile was sharp as a scalpel. Mr. Vane, do you have any idea who you've allowed into your home? This woman had her medical license revoked for performing unauthorized procedures on patients. She's legally barred from practicing medicine in 3 states. Clara watched Julian's expression shift, but she couldn't read it. The warmth from the past week, the midnight feedings, the shared confessions, the blank spaces suddenly felt like a memory from someone else's life. The checkup, Julian said, his voice carefully neutral. Can you complete it? Brennan nodded, setting his bag on the exam table. Of course, but I feel obligated to inform the proper authorities about this situation. A disgraced doctor practicing without a license in what appears to be a private medical facility. The medical board would be very interested. The room spun. Clara gripped the edge of the changing table, her vision tunneling. Not just her freedom at risk, now her entire existence would be exposed. And Leo. God, Leo. The baby she woke up for every 2 hours, who'd learned to smile at her last week. Who reached for her now instead of crying when Julian tried to hold him alone. She'd become attached. Dangerously, irrevocably attached. Brennan completed his examination in silence, his movements efficient and cold. Leo fussed under his unfamiliar touch. Clara wanted to intervene, wanted to tell him he was holding the stethoscope too firmly. But she couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stand frozen while her world collapsed for the second time. When Brennan finished, he snapped his bag shut and turned to Julian. The child is healthy. Whatever Miss Whitlock has been doing seems to be working. But I'll be filing a report with the Maryland Medical Board by end of business today. He left without another word. The door clicked shut. The silence that followed felt like a tomb. I need to leave, Clara heard herself say. I need to pack. I need to... The doors are locked. Julian's voice was flat, impossible to read. Estate protocol during outside visits. Clara moved anyway, muscle memory from 3 years of running taking over. She crossed to the nursery door, tried the handle, locked. She went to the connecting door to her room, also locked. The panic clawed up her throat, sharp and acidic. Let me out. Her voice cracked. Please, before the police come, before they arrest me here, before... Before what? Julian stepped closer. Before you disappear again? Before you leave my son with no one who understands his condition? I have to run. It's what I do. Clara pressed her forehead against the door, her breath coming in short gasps. It's the only thing I have left. Behind her, Leo started to cry that specific pitch that meant he was picking up on her distress. She turned automatically, every instinct screaming to go to him, but her feet wouldn't move. You're not going anywhere, Julian said quietly. Not yet. Not until I decide what to do about this. And Clara realized she'd made a critical mistake. She'd thought the blank space on Julian's arm meant protection, but she'd forgotten what he was. What he did to problems. What he might do to her. Chapter 6. Clara spent 3 hours locked in the nursery, waiting for sirens. She held Leo and watched the security monitors, expecting police cars to pour through the gates at any moment. Her bag was packed, what little she had. She'd mapped the estate in her mind, counting exits she couldn't reach and windows she couldn't open. Julian returned at sunset. He looked different. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal those tattooed forearms. There was blood on his knuckles, just a trace, mostly cleaned, but Clara had seen enough trauma cases to recognize the pattern. Fresh, recent. Sit down, he said. Clara tightened her grip on Leo. What did you do? What needed to be done? Julian crossed to the window, his back to her. Dr. Brennan won't be filing any reports. Not today. Not ever. The air left Clara's lungs. You killed him. I didn't say that. Julian turned, and his expression was unreadable. I said he won't be filing reports. There's a difference. What difference? The difference between a dead body and a man who's decided his career is more important than causing problems for people who don't appreciate interference. Julian moved closer, and Clara saw something fierce in his eyes. Not anger, but something more primal. Dr. Brennan has had his medical license suspended pending investigation into financial irregularities. He's currently on a plane to Switzerland, where he'll remain until he learns to keep his mouth shut about things that don't concern him. Clara's mind raced. You framed him. I motivated him to reconsider his priorities. Julian sat in the rocking chair opposite her, his movements deliberate. And I made it clear what happens to people who threaten what's mine. I'm not yours. You saved my son's life. You've spent 2 weeks monitoring his breathing, guiding my hands, turning this fortress into something that almost feels like a home. His voice dropped. You think that doesn't make you mine? Clara looked down at Leo, who was falling asleep against her shoulder, his tiny fist curled around her finger. She'd been here 14 days. 14 days of night, feedings and teething cries, and watching Julian slowly transform from a dangerous stranger into something more complicated. In this city, Julian continued, the law says you are a criminal. The medical establishment says you're too dangerous to practice. They stripped everything from you because you chose to save a life instead of following their protocols. He leaned forward, his dark eyes locked on hers. But in this house, you are a saint. You are the woman who brought my son back from death. And I don't care what the law thinks. You can't just ignore the law. Clara, her name from his mouth sounded like a prayer and a claim. I've ignored the law my entire life. I've built an empire on the premise that their rules don't apply to men like me. Why would I suddenly develop a conscience about protecting the woman who saved the only thing I have left to love? Clara's throat tightened. Brennan was just the first. There will be others. Someone will recognize me eventually. Someone will. No. Julian's voice turned absolute, final. They won't, because as long as you stay, I will rewrite your history. I will erase every record, bury every file, silence every person who might recognize Dr. Clara Chen. He stood, closing the distance between them. I will make you invisible to everyone except the people in this house. No one will ever touch you again. That's not protection. That's erasure. It's both. He reached out, his tattooed hand hovering near her face but not quite touching. You've spent 3 years running from what you are. Let me give you something better. Let me give you a place where your forbidden knowledge isn't a curse. It's the reason you're irreplaceable. Clara's breath caught. She could feel the heat from his hand, could see the blank space on his forearm where he'd said she belonged. And if I want to leave? Something flickered across Julian's face, pain, maybe, or fear disguised as control. Then I'll let you go, eventually, when Leo is stable, when I'm sure he won't, his voice cracked, when I know he'll survive without you. You mean when you can survive without me? Julian's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Outside the window, the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Inside the nursery, Clara held a sleeping baby and stared at a dangerous man who'd just offered to rewrite reality to keep her safe. I need time, she whispered. Take all the time you need, Julian said quietly. You're not going anywhere. And for the first time since Brennan walked through the door, Clara realized she didn't want to. Chapter 7. The alarm shattered the 3 a.m. silence like gunfire. Clara jolted awake, her hand already reaching for Leo's crib, before her mind fully processed the sound. Red emergency lights flooded the nursery, turning everything into a nightmare landscape of shadows and blood-colored illumination. Leo was screaming not his usual cry, but something primal, terrified by the chaos erupting around him. Julian burst through the door, weapon drawn, Marcus behind him. Get away from the windows, now. Clara scooped Leo from the crib, her training overriding panic. What's happening? Breach, east perimeter. Julian's voice was clipped, military, precise. The Kozlov family. They've been asking questions about you, about the miracle nurse who saved the Vain Air. He positioned himself between Clara and the door. They want leverage. Gunfire erupted somewhere below. Leo's screams intensified, his face turning red, his tiny body rigid with terror. Clara held him against her chest, trying to calm him, but the alarm kept wailing, and the lights kept flashing, and Leo's cry cut off mid-breath. Clara's blood turned to ice. She tilted him in her arms, saw the telltale arch of his neck, the way his chest froze. Not again. God, not again. Julian. Her voice cut through the chaos. He's not breathing. Julian's head snapped toward her, and she saw every nightmare he'd ever had reflected in his eyes. No, we just... The stress triggered it. Clara was already moving to the exam table, laying Leo down with hands that refused to shake despite the terror clawing at her throat. The fear, the noise it caused, the airway to collapse again. More gunfire. Closer now. Marcus spoke urgently into his radio. Boss, they're in the east wing. We need to move. Lock it down. Julian's voice turned absolute. No one gets to this floor. I don't care what it takes. We can't hold them, and... I said lock it down. Julian crossed to Clara, his weapon still in his hand. What do you need? Time. Clara's fingers found Leo's pressure points, her muscle memory taking over. And silence. I need to hear his breathing when it starts again. You'll have both. Julian turned to Marcus. Get everyone to the hallway. Reinforce the door. Nothing gets through. Marcus hesitated for half a second, then nodded and disappeared. The estate erupted into a war zone. Clara could hear shouting, more gunfire, the sound of something heavy slamming against a door somewhere below. But she blocked it all out, focusing on the blue-tinged infant in front of her, on the technique that had cost her everything and might cost her everything again. Leo's lips were turning purple. "Talk to me." Julian's voice came from the door, where he'd positioned himself with his back against it, weapon raised. "Tell me he's going to be okay." "I don't know." Clara's honesty felt brutal, but he deserved it. Last time was in a diner, controlled environment. This time, something slammed against the nursery door. Julian braced harder, his tattooed arms flexing. "This time you have me. Whatever you need. However long it takes, I've got the door." Clara looked at him, this dangerous man holding back an invasion so she could save his son. The trust in that stance was absolute, terrifying, sacred. She turned back to Leo and began the maneuver. The first compression. The baby's body convulsed. The door shuddered. Julian held it closed, his shoulders absorbing the impact. The second compression. Clara's fingers worked with precision, born from desperation. More gunfire, voices shouting in Russian, the sound of Marcus screaming orders. The third compression. The twist. The prayer. Leo gasped, then screamed. The most beautiful sound Clara had ever heard. She scooped him up, holding him against her chest as his cries filled the nursery. Behind her, Julian sagged against the door, his weapon lowering, his entire body trembling with relief. "Clear!" Marcus shouted from the hallway. "East wing secured, 3 hostiles down." But Julian didn't move. He stayed pressed against that door, his head tilted back, his eyes closed. When he finally opened them and looked at Clara, she saw something raw and unguarded that stole her breath. "Twice," he said quietly. "You've saved him twice." Clara held Leo tighter, feeling his heartbeat against hers, his breath warm and steady and alive. "I'd do it 1,000 times." "I know." Julian finally stepped away from the door, crossing to her with movements that looked almost dazed. "That's why I'm never letting you go." He wrapped his arms around both of them, Clara and Leo together, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the estate, the fortress didn't feel like a cage. It felt like something she might actually want to call home. Chapter 8. Julian was gone for 3 hours. Clara tracked every minute on the nursery clock while Leo slept against her chest, his breathing steady and perfect, oblivious to the violence unfolding somewhere in the estate below. She heard the final gunshot at 6:47 a.m., then silence. The kind of silence that meant either victory or death, and Clara couldn't bring herself to move from the rocking chair to find out which. When the door finally opened at 7:12, Julian stood in the frame covered in blood that wasn't his. His white shirt was ruined, his face splattered with evidence of what he'd done. But his eyes were clear and calm and absolutely focused on her. "It's over," he said quietly. "The Kozlovs won't be a problem anymore." Clara should have been horrified, should have recoiled from the violence written across his skin. But all she felt was relief so overwhelming it made her dizzy. "You're not hurt?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "No." Julian crossed to them slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter something fragile. He knelt beside the rocking chair, eye level with her and Leo. "You? We're fine." Clara looked down at the sleeping baby. "He's been calm for the past hour. Vitals are stable." Julian reached out, his blood-stained hand hovering over his son's head but not quite touching. "I can't. I need to clean up first." "Julian." Clara caught his wrist before he could pull away. His pulse hammered beneath her fingers, adrenaline still flooding his system. "Thank you, for holding the door, for trusting me." Something cracked in his expression. "You think I had a choice? You're the only person who can save him. The only person who's ever—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "I'll be back in 20 minutes. He disappeared into the bathroom connected to the nursery. Clara heard water running, heard him moving with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd cleaned blood off their skin too many times to count. When he emerged in clean clothes, his face scrubbed raw, he looked almost vulnerable. Dawn light filtered through the nursery windows, turning everything soft and golden. Clara had transferred Leo to his crib, finally, her arms aching from holding him for so long. She stood at the window, watching the sun rise over the estate walls, over the scene of whatever battle Julian had just won. "I need to tell you something." Julian's voice came from behind her. "And I need you to let me finish before you decide." Clara turned. He stood in the center of the nursery, his hands at his sides, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. "I've had Marcus working on something for the past week, a new identity. Complete history, medical license under a different name, credentials that will hold up under any scrutiny." He pulled a folder from inside his jacket, setting it on the exam table. "Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Johns Hopkins graduate, 5 years of pediatric experience, recently relocated from Seattle. She's you, but clean, untouchable." Clara's breath caught. "Why?" "Because I'm giving you a choice," Julian's voice roughened. "A real one, not the cage I forced you into 3 weeks ago. You can take that identity and go anywhere. Practice medicine again. Have the life they took from you. Marcus has arranged transport, housing, everything you'd need to start over. Or you stay." He moved closer, and she could see the fear beneath his control. "You stay here, with Leo, with me. And we stop pretending this is just about my son needing a nurse." Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. "What are we pretending?" "That I haven't fallen in love with you." The words came out raw, unguarded. "That I don't wake up at 3 a.m. just to watch you check his breathing. That I haven't started measuring my days by the moments you smile at me when I finally hold him right." Julian's hands flexed at his sides. "That when I was holding that door, the only thing I could think was that I couldn't lose you. Not you." The nursery fell silent except for Leo's soft breathing. "I don't need you because of my son," Julian continued quietly. "I need you because you turned this fortress into a home. Because you guided my hands and saw past the ink and the violence and still chose to stay. Because you're brave and brilliant, and you saved the only 2 things in this world I love." Clara's eyes stung. "2 things? Leo." Julian's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And you." He picked up the folder, held it out to her. "So choose, freedom without me, or captivity with me. Either way, you'll have a life, but only one of them includes us." Clara looked at the folder. At the escape he'd spent a week arranging, at the choice he was giving her despite the terror in his eyes. Then she looked at Leo, sleeping peacefully in his crib. At the nursery that had become her sanctuary. At Julian, standing before her with his heart bleeding through the cracks in his armor. She didn't take the folder. "I choose us," she whispered, and watched Julian Vane fall to his knees in relief. Chapter 9. The diner was different from Rosie's, cleaner, brighter, the kind of place where families came for Sunday breakfast, instead of criminals for midnight deals. But the 3 people sitting in the corner booth were the same ones who'd met in that roadside nowhere 6 months ago. Almost the same. Leo sat in a high chair, 10 months old now, smearing mashed banana across the tray with the focused determination of someone conducting important scientific research. His cheeks were round and healthy, his lungs strong enough to produce delighted shrieks when Clara made faces at him. "You're going to regret teaching him that sound," Julian said, but his mouth curved into something that still surprised Clara every time she saw it, a genuine smile, soft and unguarded. Too late. Clara wiped banana off Leo's chin. "He's already perfected it." Julian reached across the table, his hand covering hers. The morning sunlight streaming through the window caught on his forearm, illuminating ink she'd memorized over months of midnight conversations. The tally marks, the Roman numerals, the wilting roses. But there was something new now, nestled in what had been blank space on his inner wrist. A small, delicate medical caduceus, wrapped in vines that bloomed into tiny flowers. Underneath, in script so fine it was almost invisible, Clara. She'd cried when he showed her, 2 months ago. He'd gotten it done without telling her, came home and simply rolled up his sleeve at dinner. "For the woman who gave me a second chance," he'd said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "I was thinking," Julian said now, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Maybe it's time we made it official." Clara's heart stuttered. "Made what official?" He pulled a small black box from his jacket pocket and set it on the table between the coffee cups and Leo's banana massacre. "This. Us. The fact that I haven't slept alone in 4 months and I never want to again." The ring inside was simple, a single diamond on a platinum band. No ostentatious display of wealth, just something beautiful and real. "Julian." "You can say no," he interrupted, and she heard the fear beneath the words. "You can tell me it's too fast, too complicated, that you need more time. But I've spent 6 months watching you turn my fortress into a home. Watching you love my son like he's yours. watching you smile at me like I'm not the monster everyone else sees." His voice roughened. "And I don't want to waste another day pretending you're not the best thing that's ever happened to us." Leo banged his fist on the high chair tray, as if voting yes. Clara looked at the ring, at Julian, who'd once held a door against an invasion so she could save his son, at Leo, who reached for her now with sticky banana fingers, calling out "Mama" in that way that still made her chest ache. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, the ghost hiding in a roadside diner, convinced her forbidden knowledge made her dangerous. And the woman she was now, Dr. Sarah Mitchell on paper, but Clara Vane in her heart, using those same forbidden hands to build something beautiful. "Yes," she said simply. Julian's relief was palpable. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like everything else about this impossible, dangerous, wonderful life they'd built together. They left the diner as a family. Julian carried Leo on his hip, the baby's hand tangled in his father's hair. Clara walked beside them, her engagement ring catching the sunlight, still surreal and perfect on her finger. Julian held the door open for her, and Clara noticed something that made her pause. He wasn't scanning the parking lot for threats, wasn't calculating exits and risk factors, wasn't wearing the hypervigilance that had defined him for so long. He was just looking at them, at his son and the woman he loved. "What?" he asked, catching her expression. "Nothing." Clara rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and brief, and full of promise. "Just noticing how good you've gotten at this." "At what?" "Being happy." Julian shifted Leo to his other hip, his free arm wrapping around Clara's waist. "I had a good teacher." They walked to the car through golden morning light, and if anyone noticed the tattooed man with the infant and the woman who looked at him like he'd hung the stars, they probably assumed it was just another family. Just another Sunday. They wouldn't have guessed that 6 months ago, in a different diner, a baby had stopped breathing and 2 broken people had found each other in the worst possible moment. They wouldn't have known that sometimes the most dangerous hands are the ones that know how to heal, or that sometimes a fortress can become a home, and a ghost can become a wife, and a monster can become a father who finally knows how to hold what matters without breaking it. The Vane legacy had changed. It wasn't written in violence anymore. It was written in second chances, in forbidden knowledge that saved instead of destroyed, in love that bloomed in blank spaces that were meant for loss. Clara looked back at the diner one last time before they drove away. Different place, same 3 people. But everything, absolutely everything, had changed. Sometimes salvation comes wrapped in tattoos and tragedy. Sometimes the hands deemed too dangerous to heal are exactly the ones that save us. And sometimes the most forbidden love is the one that rewrites every rule. If this story grabbed you by the heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of dangerous love, second chances, and the beautiful chaos that happens when 2 broken souls refuse to stay shattered. Stay tuned, more stories are coming that will make you believe in the impossible.